Julian Thorne stood at the altar in the grand cathedral of Port Sterling. Reports indicate his palms were slick with perspiration, his heart beating rapidly within his chest. His bride, Isabella Rossi, presented a striking figure. Her custom-made gown accentuated her form, a radiant smile directed towards the congregation, yet her gaze remained fixed solely on Julian, creating an image of devoted attention. The couple's courtship had spanned 2 years, culminating in this ceremony. Julian's brother, Victor Thorne, serving as best man, nudged him sharply, reportedly whispering, "You're a fortunate man, Julian," loud enough to elicit amusement from nearby guests. Julian acknowledged the sentiment with a slight smile, seemingly accepting his good fortune. Vows were exchanged, pledges of lifelong commitment concluded with a kiss described by onlookers as hopeful. Sources close to Julian now suggest that knowledge of subsequent events might have prompted a different decision at that very moment. The ensuing reception featured numerous toasts and celebratory sounds. Victor Thorne commandeered the microphone, delivering a somewhat rambling speech referencing Julian's history of success through his logistics enterprise. Attendees reacted with laughter. Julian later danced with Isabella, her proximity and quiet laughter noted by observers. This was perceived by Julian at the time as the beginning of their shared life. Later that evening, the newlyweds arrived at their residence, Julian's substantial property in the city's affluent district, now designated as their shared home. Exhausted from the day's events, Julian initiated physical closeness, a customary gesture after months of dating. Isabella abruptly withdrew, stating firmly, "Not tonight, Julian. My body, my choice." Julian paused, taken aback by the response, but ultimately acquiesced. He initially attributed her reluctance to wedding-related stress, anticipating a change in behavior. However, the pattern persisted. Nightly attempts at intimacy by Julian were met with Isabella's cold refusal, her arms often crossed, her gaze averted. The phrase, "my body, my choice," became her standard repeated reply. Julian reportedly spent nights awake, contemplating the cause of the rift, questioning his own actions, and whether Isabella harbored regrets about the marriage. Attempts to discuss the situation were rebuffed. Isabella would insist she was fine before immersing herself in her mobile phone. The device's screen often illuminated the room late into the night as her fingers rapidly typed messages she shielded from Julian's view. When questioned about her correspondence, Isabella consistently cited work as the reason for her late-night texting, delivering the explanation quickly and without elaboration. Julian initially sought to accept this. As days stretched into weeks, the emotional distance between them widened. Isabella began taking prolonged absences from the house, citing errands as her purpose, yet returning without apparent purchases or completed tasks. Julian observed her smiling privately at her phone screen, a subtle expression not directed at him. During meals, Isabella often showed little interest in food, responding to Julian's inquiries about her day with monosyllabic answers like, "fine." Julian began to note other previously overlooked details, such as Isabella's persistent questions regarding his financial status, the state of his successful logistics company, Thorne Global Freight, his personal savings, and future financial plans. She dismissed these inquiries as simple curiosity. Julian had established the company single-handedly, investing significant personal effort and capital. Her focus on his assets struck him as peculiar, more akin to assessment than spousal interest. Concurrently, Julian's brother, Victor, began visiting the house with increased frequency. Julian had employed Victor as a regional manager at his company a year prior, providing a substantial salary and benefits package. Victor's visits were often unannounced, justified as work-related check-ins requiring urgent signatures or discussions. He would make himself comfortable in the main living area, consuming beverages provided, and inquire about Isabella's well-being, sometimes remarking, "How's the wife treating you?" with a knowing smirk. Julian typically deflected these comments lightly. However, Julian observed Victor's gaze shifting towards Isabella upon her entrance, and noted Isabella offered Victor brief, constrained smiles in return. Although Julian initially dismissed these interactions, they became a persistent source of unease. By the conclusion of the first month of marriage, Julian's demeanor had reportedly altered significantly. He spent sleepless nights observing the blue light from Isabella's phone casting shadows while she texted. He had ceased initiating intimacy, the repeated rejection having taken its toll. One particular night, the situation became unbearable for Julian. He waited until Isabella appeared to be asleep, her phone emitting soft, intermittent buzzing sounds from the nightstand. He refrained from examining the device, deeming it an invasion of privacy, yet the persistent buzzing continued. Unable to rest, Julian rose and walked the hallway, attempting to quell growing suspicions. He grappled with the conflict between his marital vow of trust and the unanswered questions fueled by Isabella's behavior. The following evening, Julian overheard Isabella's voice, low and secretive, emanating from the locked master bathroom. Pressing his ear against the solid oak door, he distinctly heard her whisper, "He's clueless. Just wait." A feeling of palpable tension filled Julian. The identity of the person on the other end of the call remained unknown. As Julian shifted his weight, a floorboard creaked audibly in the quiet house, and the whispering abruptly ceased. Moments later, Isabella emerged from the bathroom, clutching her phone tightly, her expression unreadable. "Who were you talking to?" Julian inquired, maintaining a level tone. "Work," Isabella replied swiftly, moving past him towards the bedroom. Julian pressed further, noting the late hour. "At midnight?" Isabella turned sharply towards him, reportedly stating firmly, "Just drop it, Julian." He did not pursue the matter further at that instant. However, this exchange solidified Julian's resolve. He determined he would uncover the truth behind her secrecy, unaware at the time of the full extent of the deception involved. Within a month of the wedding ceremony, Julian Thorne concluded that the state of his marriage was untenable. Isabella Rossi's emotional distance had become, in his assessment, an impenetrable barrier. Her recurring phrase, "My body, my choice," initially perceived as a minor issue, was now interpreted by Julian as a significant point of contention. Suspicions grew that Isabella was concealing information, fueled by observations of her engrossed in her mobile phone, displaying reactions like smirking at messages she shielded from his view, and undertaking lengthy errands with vague explanations upon return. Julian reported that prior to his relationship with Isabella, he did not consider himself prone to jealousy. However, mounting uncertainty regarding her behavior led him to initiate a direct conversation. The confrontation occurred on a Friday evening. The residence was quiet, save for the sound of a television Julian was reportedly not watching. Isabella was seated on a sofa, occupied with texting. Julian initiated the conversation, maintaining a calm tone, stating, "Isabella, we need to talk." Without looking up from her device, she inquired, "About what?" Her thumbs continued their rapid movement across the screen. "About us," Julian replied. "You're distant, you refuse physical contact. What's going on?" At this point, Isabella reportedly met his gaze. Julian perceived her expression as containing elements of annoyance or perhaps guilt. "Nothing's going on," she stated sharply. "I'm just not in the mood. You don't own me, Julian." The impact of this statement reportedly caused Julian significant distress. He stood silently, his jaw reportedly clenched, seeking further insight from her expression. "I'm not trying to own you," he retorted. "I'm trying to understand my wife." Isabella responded by rolling her eyes, picking up her phone, and abruptly leaving the residence. The front door was heard slamming shut. Julian did not pursue her. Julian subsequently focused his attention on his business, Thorne Global Freight. The company, established by Julian over a decade prior, starting with a single truck and expanding to a crew of 20, represented a major focus of his life. However, concerns about his marriage persisted. His brother, Victor Thorne, employed as a project manager within the company, exhibited behavior Julian found unusual. Victor began visiting Julian's office with greater frequency than required by his duties, often leaning casually against the doorframe. He repeatedly inquired about Julian's marital status, asking, "How's married life, big shot?" with a frequency and casualness that Julian noted. Julian typically responded that things were fine, but observed that Victor's questions often shifted specifically to Isabella. "Is she happy? Keeping you on your toes?" Victor would laugh during these exchanges, but appeared to carefully observe Julian's reaction. This pattern prompted Julian to question the motive behind Victor's persistent inquiries. A specific incident involved Victor asking about Julian's financial situation during a coffee break. "Business still raking it in?" Victor inquired while stirring his coffee. "Yeah, steady," Julian confirmed, observing his brother. Victor nodded, then added, "You ever think about cashing out? You've got enough to coast." Julian frowned, replying, "Why would I? This is my life." Victor shrugged, smirking slightly, and remarked, "Just saying. Isabella might like a cushier setup." Julian found the comment peculiar and memorable, though he initially dismissed it, attributing it to Victor's known personality traits, including perceived nosiness and a history of sibling rivalry dating back to childhood conflicts over possessions. Julian did not initially recognize these events as potential warning signs. One evening, Isabella left her mobile phone unattended on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. The screen illuminated, displaying an incoming text message. Julian acknowledged the impropriety, but viewed the message. It was from a contact identified only as M, containing just 2 words: "All good." Julian immediately suspected the sender was Victor Thorne. He did not interact further with the phone, but remained looking at the screen until Isabella emerged wrapped in a towel. She quickly retrieved the device, her eyes narrowing. "What are you doing?" she inquired sharply. "Nothing," Julian replied untruthfully. "Just saw it buzz." Isabella reportedly did not seem convinced, but did not press the issue. Julian retired for the evening feeling profoundly uneasy. The following day, Julian accessed their shared online phone account to review call logs, an action he undertook despite personal reservations, feeling compelled to seek confirmation. He discovered records of numerous calls between Isabella's number and Victor's mobile number. Dozens of calls were listed, some exceeding an hour in duration, occurring predominantly late at night during periods when Julian was asleep or absent from the residence. Reports indicate Julian's hands trembled as he printed the call list. He chose not to confront Isabella immediately, deciding instead to gather more definitive evidence. He began monitoring her movements and interactions more closely, though Isabella appeared either unaware or indifferent to his scrutiny. Events reached a critical point approximately 1 week later. Isabella informed Julian she was going out to meet a friend for drinks and departed the house quickly. After a 10-minute interval, Julian followed her. Maintaining a discreet distance, he trailed her vehicle across the city. Isabella did not drive to a bar or restaurant. Instead, she proceeded to a secluded park situated on the city's outskirts, an area known for being poorly lit after dark. Julian parked his vehicle about a block away and observed Isabella exit her car. Shortly thereafter, he witnessed Victor Thorne stepping out from his own truck, hands in his pockets. Julian reportedly stopped breathing momentarily as Isabella approached Victor. Before Julian could fully process the scene, he observed them engaged in a prolonged, intense kiss, the nature of which suggested prior intimacy. Julian gripped the steering wheel with significant force, causing his knuckles to turn white. The confirmation of an affair involving his wife and his own brother left him seated in his vehicle, reportedly stunned. The reality of the situation became clear. Julian perceived this not as a casual transgression, but as a profound betrayal. The visual memory of the encounter was intensely vivid. He drove back to his residence, now possessing direct knowledge of the affair. Julian resolved to take decisive action, believing both Isabella and Victor had underestimated his response to their deception. The discovery in the park marked a significant turning point for Julian. The discovery in the park reportedly did not break Julian Thorne emotionally, but rather solidified his resolve. Having spent a month suppressing doubts and rationalizing Isabella Rossi's behavior, the witnessed kiss served as irrefutable confirmation. He concluded they were not merely engaged in infidelity, but were actively deceiving him. Sources indicate Julian drove home that night with steady hands, his mind actively formulating a plan. He exhibited no outward signs of distress like crying or shouting. Instead, he became intensely focused. He resolved that Isabella and Victor Thorne had fundamentally misjudged his character if they anticipated a passive response. The following morning, while Isabella remained asleep, Julian proceeded to his office at Thorne Global Freight. He possessed the previously obtained phone records detailing extensive communication between Isabella and Victor, some calls occurring while Julian was present in the adjacent room. He then examined financial records. His bank statements revealed a series of withdrawals he had not authorized, initially small amounts that gradually increased, all linked to Isabella's debit card. Investigation suggested she had been systematically diverting funds, using vague receipts to obscure the transactions. Further evidence emerged from cloud-synced text message backups dating back months, including messages exchanged before the wedding. One text from Victor to Isabella reportedly read, "He's loaded, stick it out." Another from Isabella stated, "I'll get what I can." This evidence led Julian to perceive the relationship not as a failed romance, but as a premeditated scheme. That afternoon, Julian contacted his legal counsel, Greg Maxwell, the attorney who had drafted the prenuptial agreement Julian had insisted upon. Isabella had signed the agreement, albeit reportedly with reluctance, making light of Julian's perceived lack of trust at the time. "I want an annulment," Julian informed Maxwell, detailing the affair and the financial irregularities. "She married me under false pretenses. It's fraud." Maxwell reportedly confirmed the viability of the case, stating, "We've got a case. Give me everything. Texts, photos, proof." Julian dedicated the subsequent 2 days to compiling evidence. This included photographing Isabella's phone screen when left unlocked, capturing Victor's contact name displayed alongside a heart emoji. He also engaged a private investigator to conduct surveillance, obtaining photographic proof of further meetings between Isabella and Victor. Each piece of evidence contributed to a comprehensive picture of the situation. Isabella apparently sensed a shift in Julian's behavior when he ceased regular communication. He avoided direct confrontation, choosing not to reveal his knowledge prematurely. When Isabella questioned his prolonged stares or asked, "What's your problem?" Julian would reportedly offer dismissive, non-committal replies. Observers noted Isabella became increasingly agitated and began packing for a supposed weekend trip, under the impression she still had time. On the day Julian initiated legal proceedings, Maxwell arranged for the annulment papers to be served to Isabella at their residence. Julian deliberately absented himself, wishing to avoid witnessing her reaction. Isabella contacted Julian via phone shortly after, reportedly screaming, "You can't do this!" Julian terminated the call. The following day, Isabella filed a countersuit seeking alimony, alleging Julian had coerced her into the marriage and claiming entitlement to a share of his company assets. a move Julian viewed as audacious given the circumstances. The workplace environment became tense. Victor Thorne arrived at the office the following Monday, behaving as if nothing unusual had occurred. He entered Julian's office, casually tossing a clipboard onto the desk. "Got those site updates for you," Victor reportedly said with a grin. Julian looked directly at his younger brother, recalling past instances of providing assistance, yet now perceiving him as unrecognizable. "You're fired," Julian stated flatly. Victor's grin disappeared. "What?" "You heard me. Get out," Julian reiterated. Victor stammered, "Julian, come on." "What's this about?" Julian stood, leaning closer. "I saw you with her. Pack your stuff, you're done." Victor's complexion reportedly changed from pale to flushed. "It's not what you think," he began, but Julian interrupted. "Save it for someone who cares." Victor gathered his belongings and departed, uttering curses under his breath. Further conflict arose during a planned family dinner at their mother's residence that weekend. Julian arrived to find both Isabella and Victor seated at the dining table. His mother quickly intervened, hands clasped, expressing distress. "Daniel, we need to fix this," she reportedly pleaded, her voice trembling. "They told me everything. It was a mistake, just fun that got out of hand." Julian directed his gaze first at his mother, then at Isabella and Victor. Isabella avoided eye contact while Victor smirked, appearing confident. "Fun?" Julian repeated slowly. "Stealing from me? Sleeping with my wife? That's your idea of fun?" His mother flinched. "He's your brother," she implored. "Forgive him." Julian laughed, the sound described as hard and bitter. "He's not my brother. He's a leech. And her," he gestured towards Isabella, "she's a gold digger who never loved me." Isabella stood abruptly, protesting. "That's not true." Victor grabbed her arm, pulling her back down. "Julian, let's talk this out," Victor said, attempting a calm demeanor. Julian stepped towards him aggressively. "You don't get to talk. You don't get anything from me, not my money, not my trust, not my name." Turning to his mother, he declared, "You're picking him over me?" "Fine. You're out too." His mother gasped. But Julian exited the house without further interaction, the sounds of their voices fading behind him. The court hearing proceeded quickly. Isabella's legal team presented a narrative depicting her as a victim trapped in a controlling marriage. Julian's attorney, Greg Maxwell, systematically refuted these claims, presenting the compiled evidence, text messages, surveillance photos, bank records, and the signed prenuptial agreement. This marriage was a sham, Maxwell argued before the judge. She targeted him for his wealth. The presiding judge concurred with Maxwell's assessment. An annulment was granted, dissolving the marriage entirely. The judgment explicitly denied Isabella any claim to alimony or financial settlement. Reports indicate Isabella glared intensely at Julian as she exited the courtroom, followed closely by Victor Thorne. Julian did not express triumph at the outcome, reportedly feeling a sense of emptiness despite the favorable legal result. Following the annulment, Julian Thorne found himself alone in his residence, now solely his property once more. The silence was profound, yet reportedly owned by him. Sources indicate that while he perceived the court's decision as a victory against Isabella Rossi and Victor Thorne, he anticipated further conflict. He believed Isabella particularly would attempt further action, with Victor likely following her lead. The legal win, while satisfying, was deemed insufficient resolution by Julian. He felt that Isabella and Victor had caused significant disruption to his life and professional reputation, and he was determined they would not escape consequence-free. They had, in his view, underestimated his resilience and resolve. Julian, having invested years building his company, Thorne Global Freight, and his personal standing, resolved to ensure they experienced the full repercussions of their actions. Isabella Rossi initiated the next phase of conflict mere days after the annulment decree. Julian's phone began receiving numerous notifications linked to Isabella's public social media activity. In widely visible posts, she portrayed herself as trapped in a loveless marriage, alleging Julian had controlled her and deprived her of assets. Accompanying text included hashtags such as "screaming injustice," alongside profile pictures apparently showing her in distress. The posts elicited a significant public response, with numerous comments condemning Julian and former acquaintances contacting him for clarification. While Julian could have disregarded the online attacks, a specific comment reportedly spurred him to action. Victor Thorne had publicly replied to Isabella's post, stating, "Julian always been a selfish prick. You deserved better." This comment reportedly served as a catalyst for Julian. Possessing evidence in the form of text messages exchanged between Isabella and Victor prior to the wedding, messages where they appeared to mock Julian. "He's loaded, stick it out," attributed to Victor. The gullible cash cow, attributed to Isabella. Julian decided to counter Isabella's narrative. He logged into his own social media account and posted screenshots of these incriminating messages, accompanied by the concise caption, "Truth hurts." He offered no further commentary or emotional display, relying solely on the presented evidence. The public reaction shifted rapidly. Isabella's supporters retracted their comments, and Victor's associates reportedly distanced themselves. Julian further disseminated this evidence by emailing key clients and mutual contacts, attaching the same proof with a brief, professional note stating he was merely setting the record straight. Reports suggest this action effectively dismantled Isabella's victim narrative and damaged Victor's credibility. Victor Thorne subsequently attempted to retaliate by targeting Julian's business. Julian received a call from Pete, a site foreman at Thorne Global Freight, reporting that Victor had visited a construction site, disparaging Julian to the crew members. Victor allegedly claimed Julian had fired him without cause and attempted to recruit several workers for a competing venture. Julian reportedly remained calm, thanking Pete for the information. His existing team remained loyal, and none accepted Victor's offer. However, Julian took preventative measures. Sarah, his long-serving and highly regarded office manager who reportedly harbored a dislike for Victor, took proactive steps. Informing key suppliers about Victor's actions and the circumstances of his dismissal, Sarah effectively rendered Victor professionally toxic within the local industry. Within weeks, sources claimed no suppliers or contractors in the area were willing to engage with Victor Thorne. The family conflict also escalated. A week following the court ruling, Julian received a text message from his mother requesting his presence for dinner to talk. Despite reservations, Julian attended. Upon arrival, he found Isabella and Victor seated at the dining table with his mother present, appearing anxious. "Daniel, sit," his mother urged softly. "We can fix this." Julian remained standing. "Fix what? Them screwing me over?" Isabella interjected, claiming Julian was overreacting and that the affair wasn't personal. Victor nodded, adopting a remorseful expression, stating, "We messed up, Julian. Let's move past it." Julian looked towards his mother, expecting support, but she sided with Victor and Isabella. "They're sorry," she said. "He's your brother." At this point, Julian reportedly responded with quiet intensity. "Sorry doesn't undo a year of lies. He's not my brother. He's a thief. And her," he gestured towards Isabella. "She's a user who played us all." His mother became emotional, accusing Julian of tearing this family apart. Julian stepped closer, his voice low. "They did that. You're just picking their side." When Victor stood, attempting to de-escalate, "Come on, man," Julian cut him off sharply. "Don't. You're nothing to me now." Turning to his mother, he stated, "Call me when you figure out who your son really is," and left the house amidst their continued protests. This was reportedly the final time Julian visited his mother's home. Returning to his own residence, Julian assessed his situation. Thorne Global Freight remained stable, client relationships were intact, and profitability continued. Sarah provided steadfast support in managing the business, offering quiet encouragement. Despite these positives, Julian remained vigilant. While Isabella's social media activity decreased and Victor's job prospects appeared non-existent, Julian anticipated further actions from them, suspecting desperation might drive their next move. He increased personal security measures, monitored his finances closely, and fortified operational controls. Late one evening, Julian received a text message from Isabella's number, containing only the words, "You'll regret this." No context or specific threat was provided, just the short, ominous phrase displayed on his phone screen. Julian reportedly remained calm, considering the message. He acknowledged past regrets, trusting Isabella, employing Victor, accepting his mother's excuses, but felt no regret regarding his current actions to hold them accountable, viewing it as justice. He did not reply to the text, but forwarded it immediately to his lawyer, Greg Maxwell, instructing him to keep it on file as potential evidence. Leaning back in the quiet of his house, Julian reflected on his losses: a wife, a brother, a mother, concluding they were not the people he believed them to be, but rather illusions. While acknowledging the emotional cost, he also recognized a sense of clarity and regained control, which he resolved never to relinquish again. The text message, "You'll regret this," lingered as a potential threat, but Julian remained unfazed, confident he had already weathered their worst attacks. He informed Greg Maxwell to anticipate trouble. "She's desperate," Maxwell reportedly observed. "Desperate people get sloppy." Julian acknowledged this possibility, but remained prepared for any eventuality, determined not to be caught off guard. Approximately 1 week later, Greg Maxwell contacted Julian with news. Isabella Rossi had filed a new legal motion, claiming Julian had coerced her into signing the prenuptial agreement. Isabella Rossi's new legal motion alleged coercion regarding the prenuptial agreement, claiming proof existed. Julian Thorne reportedly reacted with disbelief, questioning the nature of this alleged proof beyond what he considered her established pattern of deception. His attorney, Greg Maxwell, subsequently faxed the court filing to Julian. Attached were photographs featuring Julian and Isabella, which appeared to have been digitally altered to depict Julian acting aggressively towards her, shouting and grabbing her arm. While visibly manipulated, the images were potentially convincing to an uninformed observer. Accompanying the photos was a sworn affidavit from Isabella, testifying that Julian had threatened her into signing the prenuptial agreement. Reports indicate Julian reacted with anger, but maintained composure, inquiring with Maxwell about their legal recourse. Maxwell expressed confidence, stating unequivocally, "Oh, we'll bury it." A court hearing was scheduled rapidly, presumably at Isabella's urging, possibly in hopes of securing a quick settlement. Julian arrived at the courthouse accompanied by Maxwell. Isabella was observed across the room, dressed conservatively, her eyes appearing red as if from recent crying. Victor Thorne was notably absent from her side. Isabella's lawyer approached with apparent confidence, presenting the altered photographs and Isabella's narrative. "Mr. Thorne intimidated my client," the lawyer asserted. "She feared for her safety." The presiding judge, described as a pragmatic woman with a sharp gaze, examined the submitted evidence with evident skepticism. Greg Maxwell then presented Julian's defense. He submitted metadata extracted from the photographs, providing timestamps that confirmed the images were altered after the annulment had been granted. Maxwell reintroduced the previously revealed text messages, including Isabella referring to Julian as a cash cow, arguing this demonstrated her primary motivation. "This isn't coercion," Maxwell declared to the judge. "This is revenge from a woman who lost her scam." Julian Thorne then took the stand, delivering concise testimony. He stated Isabella married him for financial gain and turned against him after her affair with his brother Victor was discovered. He declared the submitted photographs were fabricated. The judge rendered her decision within approximately 10 minutes, denying Isabella's motion and closing the case. Isabella Rossi reportedly displayed visible anger as she exited the courtroom abruptly, her lawyer murmuring apologies. Julian Thorne showed no outward sign of triumph, simply leaving the courthouse. Later that evening, Victor Thorne arrived unannounced at Julian's residence. Julian was observed relaxing on his porch when Victor's truck approached. Victor exited his vehicle, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Julian, hear me out," he reportedly began, his voice unsteady. Julian set down his beverage and stood. "You've got 30 seconds, he stated firmly. Victor proceeded to explain his current difficulties: job loss, lack of prospects, being abandoned by Isabella, and causing distress to their mother. "I screwed up," Victor admitted. "I'm sorry. You're my brother." Julian stepped closer, looking directly at Victor. "You stopped being my brother the day you chose her over me. You don't get a second chance to stab me in the back." Victor flinched and attempted to argue further. "Get off my property!" Julian commanded with finality. Victor departed without further protest. Julian did not watch him leave. The following day, a handwritten letter arrived from Julian's mother. The 2-page letter reportedly contained expressions of maternal distress, accusing Julian of breaking her heart and appealing to familial bonds. "He's your blood. We're family." Julian read the letter once, interpreting it as his mother again siding with Victor and blaming Julian for the situation. He then reportedly burned the letter in a sink. Sources close to Julian suggest he felt that true family does not engage in betrayal and then demand forgiveness as an entitlement. He resolved to distance himself from their burden. Julian focused his energy on Thorne Global Freight. His office manager, Sarah, continued to demonstrate exceptional competence, managing operations efficiently and maintaining team cohesion. One morning, while bringing Julian coffee, she paused by his desk. "You okay?" she inquired, her tone reportedly conveying genuine concern rather than pity. Julian acknowledged he was getting there. Sarah offered a brief, warm smile. "Good. You deserve it." Julian observed her, noting her intelligence, steadfastness, and loyalty during his recent turmoil. Acting on impulse, Julian invited Sarah for a drink after work, an invitation she accepted. While not viewed as a complete solution, this interaction represented a potential positive step forward for Julian. Approximately 1 week later, Julian drove to a scenic overlook on the outskirts of Port Sterling, a location he previously frequented for contemplation. Standing there, surveying the city, he reflected on his recent experiences. He acknowledged significant losses: Isabella's feigned affection, Victor's loyalty, his mother's biased support. The betrayals had caused him considerable pain, leaving him feeling emotionally depleted for a period. However, he had retaliated, successfully stripping them of their power over him. His company remained strong, arguably stronger, and his life was now under his sole control. He recalled Isabella's final text message: "You'll regret this," dismissing it as an empty threat. While acknowledging his past naivety and trusting too easily, he accepted responsibility for his judgment, viewing the experience as a harsh lesson that led him to eliminate detrimental influences. They had wagered on his collapse. He had invested in his own resilience and prevailed. As the sun set, Julian reportedly released a deep breath, feeling a sense of solidity he hadn't experienced in months. He recognized he was changed, less hopeful, perhaps harder, but with greater clarity. Turning back towards his truck, he felt prepared to face the future, whatever it might hold. The conflict was concluded. They had lost, and he had triumphed.